And we already know how to use the scanner class. We've been using it already. How about that? We use stuff before we learn about them. Import java.util.scanner. We have to put that up at the top of our program. To use it, we have to create it. The name of the variable that we store our scanner object in isn't really important. We just have to use it over and over. If we want to call it Freddy, we could do that. As long as then we'd wind up using Freddy.nextInt to read in an integer. Because the variable names don't mean anything to the computer. They just mean something important to us. So I tend to use IN just because IN is easy to type. But books examples use standard IN. So to get an entire line of text, you use stdin or whatever, .next line. That would store an entire line of text in a string. But you would then have to convert it into an int or a double if you wanted to do so. If you wanted to do that. So, several methods for the scanner class. These are instance methods because you actually have to have an instance of the scanner object. You have to make a new variable, whatever, IN is equal to new scanner in order to use these. So that'll become more important once we start doing object-oriented design. It means that these methods were not defined with the static keyword. So we can call .next, it'll get a string. It'll get a quote token, which is a variable, data up to the first space or the first hitting of the enter key. If you want more than just one string, if you want more than one token, like if you want them to be able to type their entire name, 2 names, then you better not use next, you better use next line, as was shown on the previous slide. However, mixing next and next lines causes problems. So you need to decide if you need to use next line, and if you do, you either need to know how to solve that problem or you just need to use next line all the way through. So what I'm going to show you is a habit, habit I may ask you all to get into, which is to read all your data in as strings and then convert it, rather than rely on nextInt and nextDouble. And here's what I mean. I'm going to create a scanner. Add the import for it. Like I've said before, clicking on Add Import is fine, but if the choice is Create Class, that's probably absolutely something you don't want to do. I can't talk this evening for some reason. It's my migraine. So Add Import, that's totally fine. There we go. We scroll up. It added the import for it underneath the package statement. So say I wanted to ask somebody's name and then their age. I would use 2 output statements, system.out.println. And then I would read in the name. String name is equal to in.next. Because you used next rather than nextInt, nextDouble or whatever if you're reading in a string. If you don't qualify the type of data it is, you get a string. Now let's ask them for their age. So int age is equal to in.nextInt. Okay, then let's print out some message. System.out.println, your name is plus your name. System.out.println, next year you will be, and we'll print out their age plus the number 1. But I'm going to put, since this is math, inside of a print statement, I'm going to enclose them in parentheses to force this to happen first. Otherwise, it'd print out their age followed by the number 1, because we would be appending to a string. So this is okay code, but it's not great code. I'll show you why. enter your name, Joe. Enter your age, I'm 12. It says your name is Joe. Next year you'll be 13. See, that's why we own computers, to tell us important stuff like this. Let's run it again. And notice the prompt doesn't say to enter only a first name. So we're going to enter two names. My name is Joe Jackson. And it blows up. The reason it blows up is that the next call here, in.next, gets only the first, quote, token. It gets everything up to the space. That leaves this word still out there, floating, waiting to be read in. So the next time we call in.next something, the word Jackson comes stored in. So here, name is equal to Joe, and then it prints out enter your age, and before they even get a chance to type anything, since this input is still sitting there waiting in the buffer, it comes in, it tries to convert it to an int, and guess what? The word Jackson is not an integer, so that fails. That is one argument for using next line. But if you use next line, then you don't get niceties like next int and next double and stuff like that. Or you can, but I think it's a good idea just to get used to rolling up your sleeves and doing the data conversion yourself. And I'll show you why in a minute. So a better solution would be to say enter your name, and then name is equal to in.next line. That gets an entire line of data. What have I done? Oh, forgot my equal sign. And this is different from Python, where once you use the input keyword, you get whatever they type until they hit the enter key. It doesn't matter whether there's a million spaces in it or not. But it is similar to C++ when you use CIN. Because if you use CIN, you only get the first token, the first thing they type up to the first space, unless you do something very specific in order to get more than that. Okay, now this may work, it may not. The problem is that once you use next line, then subsequent calls to next int and next float may not work. This time it did. Very good. But just to be sure, and you can fix those problems by putting another call to the scanner class, which would clear your input buffer. But I'm going to go ahead and do this with next line. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a temporary variable called input. And I'm going to store my input in whatever they type in into that variable, and then I'm going to convert that to an int. Int age is equal to, I have to use a helper class. There's more than one way to parse data, but this is the most common one. Integer.parseInt, and then I pass that input variable into it. So this replaced the code. This replaced one line of code. Our line of code previously was this. So why is this so great? We had to have 3 lines of code rather than 1. Well, for one thing, it lets them type in, an entire line worth of stuff, which in this case we really don't want because we just want the number. It's also completely compatible with using next line elsewhere, and more importantly, it gets us used to not depending upon next int. And the reason for that is you won't always be getting input that somebody types into a command window. You could be getting input from a little dialog that pops up, a graphical dialog, in which case it's not going to be an int. Or you could be reading input from a web page, in which case, again, it's not going to be an int, it's going to be a string. Or you could have a socket, open, and 2 programs are communicating to each other via that socket, which happens under, instant messaging programs and the like. In which case, again, you're not going to get an int, you're going to get a string. String data is pretty much how data is passed around in a great many circumstances. And then it has to be converted into something else. So that's what this does. We get our data, and then we convert it into an int. You don't have to start using this right now, but I would like for you to start using this. You'll earn brownie points in my eyes. And yeah, it's extra steps, but it's not that many extra steps. Just remember that if you start using next line, it's a good idea to use next line throughout the program. And here is how you parse an integer. Parse means read through the input line, character by character, converting it to another format. And in this case, it's converting it into an integer, meaning that if there was a decimal point, we would get an error, we would get an exception, it would fail. We could handle that, but in this case, we're not going to. So you'll have to memorize that syntax, but you'll see it again and again, so it's worth memorizing. If you want to read in a double rather than an int, then you use double.parseDouble rather than integer.parseInt. I'll comment that out, and we'll read in a double instead. Double age is equal to integer.parse. Excuse me, we're not going to use integer.parseInt. We're going to use double.parseDouble, and we're going to pass in our input like that. Why would we pass it in as a double? Or why would we parse a double rather than an int? Just in case they type a point. They may be one of those silly people who knows their age down to the decimal point. How old are you? Well, I'm 27.3 years old. Okay, well, now this will work, whereas if we left it like this, it would generate an exception. I'm going to uncomment that line, run it. My name is Joe. I'm 27.3 years old. And it blows up because you cannot convert something that has a point in it to an integer. Well, it cannot. We could fix that error, but instead, for ease of use now, I'm just going to store my data as a double instead. So instead of integer.parseInt, I'm going to use double.parseDouble. Enter your name, Joe. I'm 28.3. Next year I'll be 29.3. Okay, it's working. Good. It handles more data, more types of data, because it handles both doubles as well as ints. Handles floating point data. If they make a mistake in entering their data, my name is Joe, and how old are you? I am 3. It's not going to know what that is, of course. So again, it blows up. Eventually, we're going to want to write our code so that this doesn't happen if they type in bad input. Instead, it just handles that gracefully. At the very least, it would terminate the program without blowing up like this, generating an exception, but at best, it would ask them to enter the data again. Okay, so I'm going to tuck this away into our typical note card. Another reason to get used to converting your data, I already mentioned it, is that if you're not tying yourself to NextInt in the scanner class, you can get input from a dialog, a graphical dialog, rather than typing it into a command window. And to do that, you'd want to use a function of the swing library called JOptionPane. I'll show you how to do that. So we're going to have to add the correct import to handle this as well. But again, I'm going to cheat and let NetBeans handle it. Okay, so enter our name. Instead of using next line, I'm going to do this. String name is equal to JOptionPane. This is a lot of typing, which is why I brought it up on my tablet so I wouldn't make a mistake. What is your name? It's giving me an error because it doesn't know what a JOptionPane is. That's because JOptionPane is a library. We will import that. It's a package. That's the better term for it. There we go. So if we scroll up now, we have 2 imports. And the swing library, which this is a part of, is graphical user interface stuff for drawing windows and things. But you don't have to have a window drawn in order to use the input dialog. Okay, so we've read in their name. Now we want to do the same thing to get their age. So again, we're not going to use next line. we're going to do this. Input is equal to JOptionPane dot show input dialog. Bugging me that it didn't pop up our choices. There we go. Show input dialog. And then we're going to show our message. Our message is enter your age. Now we don't need to print this message, enter your age, and then show it in the dialog. So I'm going to comment this out as well. We're winding up with a lot of commented out code, aren't we? Same for here. We don't need to print enter your name because that's going to be displayed in the dialog. So I'm going to comment that out as well. Our code is looking a lot cleaner actually in a way. Tell you what, I'm going to delete all that stuff. There we go. And now our program looks a little bit nicer. It still displays its output in the command window, but it pops up a cute little dialog. Enter your name, Joe Jackson. Enter your age. I'm 15. That's cooler looking, huh? That makes it look better. And I think Skip was already doing this. You already know Java, don't you? Okay, then you do a good job of reading the book. Yeah, you do a good job of reading the text and researching this stuff. So, well done. So there we go. Why? Well, show input dialog returns a string. Its input has to be stored in a string, which means that if we're going to treat it like a number, we have to convert it to a number. We have to parse it. So we read it into a string, in this case, string input. We could put this on one line so that it even looks cleaner. And then we have to parse it. But now we have a number that we can do math with. So if you want to make your programs use, the input dialog in order to work, that would be awesome. Do you have to? No, but it's still awesome. So that being said, if you're going to read your input in as a line of text, either with next line or with show input dialog, then you don't necessarily need to be using all of these methods. You don't need next int and next long and next float and next double. And the scanner class has a lot of other options too. It has things like has functions, which don't exit until there is some data to be read, which really isn't all that useful in these command line applications. But let's pop one of them up anyways. in dot has next. If that returned false, it meant that we didn't have any data waiting for us. But in this particular case, we don't need that. I can't think of a reason to use has next in this particular context. If we're using another stream of input rather than a text keyboard scanner, then yeah, then you might be very curious whether you have data waiting for you or not. I'm trying to think of a way. Nah, I'm not going to even demonstrate that. I'm going to try to wean you off from using the scanner class. So a token is a sequence of non-white space characters. What does non-white space mean? Well, if I'd left this in the way it was, I'm going to comment this out. String name is equal to in.next, like that, so that we're only reading in one piece of data. When I run it, it's waiting for me to type something in. Since I deleted the print statement, I don't know that. But it sits there and doesn't accept any input until I actually type some non-white space. White space being something other than the enter key or the spaces. And then enter your age. I'm 12, and it says, your name is hello. Next year you'll be 13. Okay, so you saw what it did. didn't exit this function .next until it had, quote, a token, which is a series of non-white space characters. What is leading white space? White space refers to all the characters that appear as blanks on a display. The space character, the tab, and new line. What is a token? It's a token of the non-white space characters. What happens if the user provides invalid input? Well, if they type a number and we're reading a floating point or a string and we're trying to read in an int, the program will crash. You can catch that error with something called exception handling, but we're not there yet. Next example of that class, quiz questions. And these are the absurd kind of quiz questions that drive me up the wall because I honestly don't remember. What famous speech is Chapter 3's first program based on? Who cares? Okay, provide Java code for the main method heading. As always, be precise. And I'm very likely to ask you this on an exam. What's the main method heading look like? It has a word, public, static, void, and it's not capitalized, unlike Microsoft Office. And then what's next? This is main, so. And then string args. Believe that to be correct. I can check. What do you know? Okay, good. Provide Java code for a print statement that prints hello world. As always, be precise. Now this is like the lamest quiz because we've talked about a whole bunch of stuff and all it wants to know is how to print. System.out, which is why I put my own quiz in there. Hello world. And if you copied and pasted this, it would not work because of the back quotes and the forward quotes, which is another reason why editing programming code in a Microsoft Office product is bad. You can disable that, but typically what I do is I just go and copy a real quote and paste it in there. It's called smart quotes, I think, or something like that. Okay, so that would do. Those are the answers to those 2 quiz questions. I will upload a more reasonable quiz by tomorrow night, and hopefully y'all can get it done before, like Monday. Get it done by Sunday night, and if that way I can have them graded, and if you have any questions over them, you can text me. I think we said that our exam was going to be on Tuesday. Would y'all mind if we moved it to Thursday? That way we have time to go over any questions on Tuesday. Does that sound good to everybody? Nobody's got to go off to Disneyland on that day? Okay. Okay, so we're done with Chapter 3. Are there any questions so far, either over homework that you've already done or any of the topics that we've talked about? And there's a whole bunch of in-class assignments that I've made up in the past 8 years. I don't remember what they all are anymore. If you do every in-class assignment, you don't never get past Chapter 4. Okay, this is a really lousy looking flowchart, especially for those who've had a CIT 1113 and we've worked on making good flowcharts. But this might not be a bad little program to write together. What it does is it asks for the temperature. Actually, the first thing it does is ask whether you want to do Celsius to Kelvin or C, or from Fahrenheit to Celsius, or from Celsius to Fahrenheit. I'm confusing myself with those options. We'll make those make sense. Then we input the temperature. And based on what they choose, what kind of conversion they choose, we convert it from Celsius to Kelvin, or from Fahrenheit to Celsius, or from whatever. I'm not liking this. Let's do a simpler version of this. So here's what our requirements are going to be. Let's ask the user 1 Celsius to F or 2 F to C or -1 to quit. And then once they enter that, let's ask for the temperature. And then based on 1 and 2, we will either 1, -1, break. Well, based on A and B. Steps A, ask the user for the temperature, the conversion. B, ask the user for the temperature. Based on A and B, we will either break or 1, convert C to F, and 2, convert F to C. And the way you go from C to F is you take your temperature and you multiply it times 1.8, and then you add 32 to it. If you're going from F to C, it's temperature minus 32, but that has to be placed in brackets to force the math to happen in the correct order. And then divide by 1.8. Or you could say times 5/9. Same math. If you've already had this equation memorized from prior schooling, you may have seen the fraction 9/5 used before in 5/9, but 1.8 is the same thing. So this isn't really a good flowchart yet, because why would we ask the user for the temperature if they've chosen to break? So if they choose -1, break. And then, if that's not true, we will ask the user for the temperature. And based on 1 and A and B, we will either do those conversions, and then we will print our result. Okay, so we're pseudocoding this right now. There's no way this would actually work as a program. Let's put this in a loop so that it'll run over and over and over. I'm going to make it while true. The reason I'm structuring it like this is I'm going to use a sentinel value in order to cause it to break. We ask the user for that. If they choose -1, we break out of our while loop. I'm going to go ahead and put braces on here, even though strictly speaking pseudocode doesn't necessarily need braces. Then we will ask the user for the temperature, and then based on A or B, if it's 1, we do that conversion. If it's 2, we do that conversion, and then we print our result. Okay, I'm liking that. Go ahead and start a new assignment. Guess we could call it in class 3. Which one was this? G. I'm just keeping that there as a. I'm not going to even use a scanner class this time. We're going to use show input dialog, just to be awesome. So I could go back up here where I had added java.util.scanner and delete that. And by the way, that package statement is not strictly necessary. If you want to, you can remove it, but then you have to let it fix itself. So I'm going to delete the package statement. It's not necessary. But then I get an error, but I fix that by clicking on that, and then it says move class to correct folder. And that moves it out of that subfolder that it was in and moves it up a level. When I edit your programs, actually, when I grade them, I go in and I delete that package statement every single time anyway. So it would save me, approximately 0.7 seconds if you would do that. Alrighty. So what is our program going to do? Let's go back and look at our pseudocode. While true, Well, that's easy enough. Ask the user 1 C to F, 2 F to C, or -1 to quit. Okay, while true. Let's declare a string for our input. Actually, let's give it a better name than that. Let's call it, let's call it input. Input is equal to JOptionPane with a capital J and a capital O and a capital P, JOptionPane, dot show input dialog, what conversion? 1 F to C, wait, C to F, doesn't really matter. 2 F to C, or -1, quit. We could format that better, but that's good enough. And to make this look better, I'm going to add some /ns, which conversion, /n, /n there, and lastly a /n there. And lastly, since I'm getting something that's too long to fit on the screen, I'm going to use the plus sign to extend my strings. You don't have to do this, but I like to get it to fit without scrolling left or right. There we go. Now you're going to get a syntax error when you do that because you don't have this import statement. So you'll see a little red dot there when you try to save it. It says cannot find symbol. Click on that error, and if you see the line add import, go for it. If you don't see the line add import, if it says create class, if that's the only thing it says, then you made a typo and you need to correct that. Now I could actually convert that to a number. I could use integer.parseInt, but I'm just going to compare it as a string. And the reason I'm going to compare it as a string is because if we're using integer.parseInt, then they have to type in an integer, and if they mess up and if they type a word, or something with a point, then it blows up. So we're going to try to make this a little bit more. I lied. I'm just going to convert it to an int. But you were doing it right when you were converting everything to uppercase and then using dot equals to do your comparison. Okay, so we're going to say choice is equal to integer.parseInt, and then we're going to pass in our input. And then we're going to check our input. If they enter a -1, we want to bail out of our loop with a break statement. Now when you have an if something break, you don't have to use an else. Why is that? Because this is leaving the code entirely. It's jumping out of the while loop entirely. You could put an else there, but it's just going to add an extra layer of braces. So I'm going to leave the else off. Yeah, I could put a comment there, but it's not necessary. And what do I mean by that? If I do have the else and the braces here, it's going to work exactly as though the else and the braces were gone. Because if this is not true, then what's it going to do? It's going to do all this code underneath here. Now, if your choice is not to break or to return, then you absolutely do have to use else. So maybe I shouldn't be skipping this. it's unnecessary syntax in this case. All right, now we're going to use another show input dialog. And I think I would just prefer to copy one so I don't have to do all that typing again. But this text is going to be different. What is the temperature to convert? Now temperature probably ought to not be an int because they may want to know what 98.6 is in Celsius. So rather than make it an int, let's convert that input into a double. Double T, or temp, is equal to double dot parse double, passing in our input string. Now let's do our math. Let's declare a variable called result and just initialize it with the value of 0. Now let's do our calculation. If the choice is equal to 1, we're going C to F. You know what? Rather than make result a double, I'd almost rather make that a string. I'm going to do that. I'm going back up here and I'm changing result to a string. So I just made this change right here. And what we'll do is we'll use that string to display our output, and it'll be more nicely formatted. We can, put the degrees, the C or the F at the end of our answer. So first, let's do our conversion. We're going to F, so let's declare our variable called temperature in F. Temperature in F is equal to that formula, which is temperature in C plus or times 1.8 plus 32. And if we wanted to use parentheses to make the calculation look prettier, we could, but it's not necessary. But we don't have anything called temp C, my error. It's just called temp. Our input is stored in a variable called temp. So I'm getting rid of that temp. And now that we have that temperature, let's create a string. Let's store this in a result. Result is equal to our temperature F plus the words degrees F. Else if choice is equal to 2, we're going F to C. Let's declare our Celsius temperature. And temp C is equal to the temperature minus 32 inside parentheses divided by 1.8. If you're not familiar with Celsius, 0 degrees C is 32 degrees F. So that's really good test for. Then we have to store our result into the result string. Now, if they didn't type in a 1 or a 2, it's an error. So let's just fill in result with an error message if they did not type in 1 or 2. Result is equal to invalid choice. Like if they type 3, you know. All right, now we want to display our output. We could just print our output with a print statement, but since we're just getting our input with a cute little dialog, let's use JOptionPane again to display the results. JOptionPane with a capital O and a capital P dot let's do show message dialog. Am I goofing? Or do I have the feeling I'm goofing? Okay. Make it show message dialog with a capital M and a capital D. The first thing in it needs to be a handle to whatever window we're in, but we don't know what window we're in, so we're just going to pass in null. And then our string is going to be, the result is followed by our result string. Then on this parentheses, I'm going to put an end while true. That's not necessary, but it's always good to note what your closing braces are. And this is end of the main method. And this is the end of the class. And I would like for y'all to do that. Consider that part of the coding standard. Notice I didn't do it everywhere. If you can see the opening brace, you don't really need to describe what the closing brace is. But I don't know what this closing brace is when I'm down here. I'd have to scroll up to see what it was, but now I can see what it is. It's an end of a while true statement. And what's this one? I don't know. I'd have to scroll up and see. Oh, that's the end of my main method. And what's that one? Well, that one's pretty obvious. We wouldn't really have to document that one, but it's the end of the class. All right, this may actually even work. I'm going to build it. See if I get any build errors. It'll be a miracle if I didn't make any typos. Wow, that's got to be a first. Okay, I'm going to run it. It says which conversion, C to F or F to C. I'm going to go C to F. 0, C is 32F, so that's an easy test. And I'll come around and I'll help debug typos. What's the temperature to convert? 0. And the result is 32 degrees F. Then it asks me again, what conversion, C to F or F to C? I'm just going to quit. No, I should test all options. Now F to C, 212, which is boiling water in F, is 100 in C. So I'm going to enter 212, and it says the result is 100 degrees C. And then lastly, -1 to quit. I saw consultation on syntax.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
Here's going.
It's all right.
Change double to a string. I typed doubles again with in there. Check the syntax. You may not be able to see it, but what I did here is the result is, end quote, plus result. You have result after the parentheses. That works? We could have declared temp new, you know, outside of all these if statements.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
What's that NULL? No. Do we have to put that?
You actually do have to put that, or you have to put something else in. And the reason we put null there is because we don't know what else to put there. This show message dialog method wants us to pass in a reference to what graphical window we are currently in. But we don't have a graphical window. We haven't done the whole rigmarole to draw a window on the screen. But we can sneak past that and just pass in null. Null means a null reference is just a reference that has a 0 in it, meaning that it's not a real object. So we don't have a real window to point it to, so we're just going to say null. We could pass in a 0 instead, but then we would have to cast it to the correct type. So I'm going to leave that null. Now I don't want to go too nuts on this because you can use this as a model for your homework. But there is something I want to show you. I don't know whether this is the right time to do this or not. I tell you what, let's all do this, look at it, and then undo it. And if you don't want to do it, that's okay. Since you know coming up that I'm going to ask you to undo it. But if you want to work with me on this, go to your first if statement. And using the shift key and the down arrow, highlight all of these if, else, if stuff. Then come up here to refactor and choose introduce method. Introduce method. And when it asks for a name, call it convert temperature. Now, if this does a nice job of it, check out what it just did. It took all of that code and moved it into a function, a method called convert temperature. So now our code is incredibly simple. Here, we get our information and we call convert temperature, which looks now like it's something that Java gave us rather than something we wrote. So where is that code? We just have to scroll up or down and then we'll find convert temperature. And if we scroll down, we see our convert temperature, and it's got all of our stuff. All of our code is still there. And we see that the way that data got into it is that data is being passed in. Now, we haven't really talked about methods to my recollection, so that's why I'm kind of shying away from introducing this, but the sooner you see these concepts, the more they'll make sense the next time. So why would we want to do that? Because it makes this code look shorter. It's easier to understand. We don't have a big processing block right after our get our input. It's just one line of code. And then if somebody needs to fix this code, we say, oh, there must be a bug in the convert temperature method. You can tell them exactly where to go, and they don't have to worry about fixing the rest of the code. They just go to that method. But I'm going to Control Z that now. I don't want that in its own method. The reason for that is that I'm going to give you a programming assignment that I want you to do, that you can base this code on, that you can base your code on this. So let's make up an assignment that looks very similar to this. What this assignment is going to be is you can pick what you want this conversion to be. Pick either kilograms to pounds or vice versa, meaning going the other way, or miles to kilometers, vice versa. And what's another cool one? Liters to quarts is a little bit silly because they're so similar. Well, we've done mass, we've done distance. I guess that's enough. But if you want to come up with another one, I'm not providing you with these formulas, but if you need them, text me and I'll give them to you. But you can Google them up online, how to convert kilograms to pounds and pounds to kilograms. I think it's just 2.2 pounds per kilogram. Yeah, that's a hint.
Or kilograms to pounds?
No, because 1 kilogram is more than a pound. So that's correct. So yeah, if somebody asks how much you weigh and you go, yeah, man, I weigh 80, then it sounds really thin.
Right.
Okay. Okay, and then miles to kilometers, I believe it's maybe 1.6 kilometers per mile. But validate these values. So, look up these conversions. Make sure they work. If you need help, text me. So, allow the user to choose their conversion. Enter a data item. Perform that conversion. And display the result. If you want to use JOptionPane, totally cool. Or if you want to use the printer and the scanner, that's also totally cool. Now when I say pick either A or B, I'm not telling you to let the user do all of these. You just pick. Do you want to do kilograms to pounds, or do you want to do miles to kilometers? You know, that's your decision. Which one of these? You know, we could put other ones in here. We could do feet to meters, feet to miles. I don't know. Hectares to square kilometers. I'm kidding, we're not going to get silly. There we go. So pick one of these conversions to implement. Then allow the user to choose their conversion, enter data item, perform that conversion, display the result. Go ahead and put it in a loop that allows repeating without rerunning the program. All right, does that make sense? So that may not take you much time at all, especially if you use the program we just wrote as your basis. Or if you want to go from scratch, you know, build up a little more muscle rather than just copying what we did and making a few changes. That's totally cool. All right. Gosh, we have 12 minutes left, I think, and that was all the material that I had planned. Have we gone over the quiz yet? Did we go over the answers to the quiz?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, we could spend 5 minutes looking at chapter 4. Why don't we call it a day? Are there any questions over today's lecture or anything else?